So we have about 15 minutes to have a conversation, and one of the many things, I actually felt like there's a lot of just in being in sync with each other among you three. I know that you didn't all share your things before, so anyway, that was really cool to experience. And one of the things that stood out to me, I guess, is how, for all of you, there was a sense of like that awe, the practice of attention that you're talking about. It exists outside of the usual measures of utility or intentionality, is kind of how Anise talked about it. So these are, to some extent, useless behaviors in a good sense. And I'm just curious, though, when one of the obstacles, I think, for a lot of people, including young people in our society, is that the world seems so to put a heavy value on utility of all of your actions. I mean, I'm thinking of undergraduate students that I know, and it's just like you're too busy to do. So I wonder if you might talk about like how has your openness to awe and wonder, your receptivity as artists and writers, how has that, have you been able to practice that in the midst of a world that seems always to be asking us for the next useful thing? And whoever wants to, yeah.
Well, I'll just jump in. Is my mic on still? Yeah? Oh, good. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's that rush to commodify everything. Our footsteps even. We can't just go for a walk. We need to get 10,000 steps, you know? But also our walks in the forest. What do we gain from a walk in the forest? Oh, better health, better imagination, lowers our blood pressure. We have to take, and claim. Or even as birders, how many birds can we name in a day? Like count it all up. And sometimes I think about this idea, we hear this line from Mary Oliver, a very famous line. She says, go outside, pay attention, and tell about it. And we all do that. But what if, and the really important part for me is taking time to leave that last part off. What if we go outside and pay attention and we don't tell about it? Because when we're telling, we're naming, we're placing our own narrative upon something that doesn't require our affirmation or our voice to make it valid. What if we just let it be? I heard Jane Goodall the other day say something, Saint Jane Goodall said, she said that she was in the woods and a fly landed on her arm. And she was so grateful in that moment that she didn't know the name of the fly. Because if she had just named it, that might have ended it. Like we do in Birdwood, we're like, oh, scarlet-thighed leaf tosser, know what that is, on to the next. And instead, she could, in that moment, see that this fly was, iridescent with blues, and it had these little feet, and, she just paused. And so that just witnessing, that just beholding. And then when we do that, we find that the richness of our voices come to us more fully, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
That reminds me of, I was in the woods just a couple of days ago, and I came upon a fox that had found a little place in the sun, a little warm spot in the sun, and I guess it was so mesmerized with that it didn't run off. And I got really close to it. And the first thing that came into my mind was to take a picture of it.
Yes.
And then I thought, I will ruin this moment if I do that. Like all that happened in, half a second. And so I was so glad that I didn't take a picture of it. In some way, it's like I have it more vividly in my mind because I didn't take that picture. But it's like we're trained to, the whole culture is telling us to. And as a writer, one of the reasons I write is to preserve, but I think that will go into my writing in some way, even though I was able to have that personal moment, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's like sometimes if you don't seek for something to serve you, it will end up serving you in a better way, circuitously or something.
Yeah.
I like that.
There's such a rush of the world to require us to commodify every engagement with ourselves, every engagement with people, with the world outside, that the way that the culture has shifted to this direction to, maybe it hasn't shifted, it's probably always been a thing that we wrestle with, but the ways in which we wrestle with it now, that wanting to capture something and preserve it and potentially like post a picture online, post a video online, and it's tricky because I think as humans both when we're seeking to engage with curiosity, there's an aspect of where it's very much with ourselves, and then there's this aspect where it's like, well, I want to have a shared experience with people, but it very easily moves over that into kind of like, let me take that experience and put this little box around it so I can like then offer exactly what it is. I love what you were saying, Lyanda, about your friend not looking up the name of this fly, like just let me just engage with whatever this moment is, and that's a I know I have that ongoing conversation because, like you mentioned, as a writer, as an artist, we're often seeking to kind of like, oh, how do I take this moment and preserve it? How do I take this moment and turn it into something else, as opposed to just being alive in the moment?
Yeah, or how do I take it and put it on a line on my CV or whatever?
Yes.
Yeah. I do feel like young people are increasingly burdened with resume type requirement. It's like you're always supposed to be every moment should be, you should be part of a club. I don't know if you high school kids know this, but you should be part of lots of clubs, that are going on your resume and whatever, right? It's going to be exhausting for you and stuff. I feel like we live in a world that doesn't actually, even the moment, even before preserving it, like there's something restful about what you just described too, about seeing that fox, right? Or even Jane Goodall seeing the fly. But we don't have a lot of value for rest, or for that kind of, it's not really disengagement. That's the irony too. It's actually more full engagement with life, right? So that you're seeing things not just instrumentally. Okay, so one of the themes that kind of ran through your talks too is that there is a connection between these practices of attention and our moral lives. So, Silas, for example, you said something about making art makes us better people. And you talked about literature and empathy and developing empathy. And I'm curious what you think might be the possibilities in our current moment, because we're reading less. There's lots of, you guys have given us an incredible list of the virtues of artistic and inspired engagement with the world. What do you see as some possibilities moving forward for us to maybe reclaim that or revitalize our connection to that broadly as a society? What can we do? What would you, maybe even just like a book that we need to read, any advice? Yeah.
Well, I think the first step is, having conversations like this. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably how I learned to do those things, was by hearing other people talk about it, or, being instructed about it. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's some self-discovery involved, but I think most of those things I was shaped by wiser people, mm-hmm. And listening to them. Mm-hmm. So just talking about it goes a long way, I think. Mm-hmm. And also not being judgmental about it in the talking about it. Mm-hmm. To some degree, there's a great privilege in being able to take a long walk in the woods. Not everybody's able to do that, And so I'm on sabbatical right now, and I found that the best thing about sabbatical is that I have so much time to walk in the woods with my dog. That's like my favorite thing about sabbatical. Mm-hmm. Yep. Going into it, I thought it was going to be, that I have more time to write. And of course, that's great. But just having that luxury, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that, one of the things that I think about with regards to kind of building an engagement with art is, kind of returns back to what we were just talking about of, that challenge of trying to quantify everything. You know, like I think it's really important to write without purpose, to paint without purpose, to walk without purpose. You know, you know, and even if it's just sort of like that, you know, for the sake of what the shape of our lives may be, if we're, you know, unfortunately required to kind of like, all right, I have 20 minutes, I have an hour, you know, that it has to be within some sort of time constrained vessel, but within that vessel that like, that it's not seeking to, I'm going to write a poem that I'm going to share with somebody, you know, I'm going to write a poem and I'm going to delete it. You know, I'm going to record a song into my phone and no one will ever hear it. I'll never listen to it again, you know? I think trying to, at least for me, like trying to remind myself to have those types of endeavors. Let me leave the house and just walk, and maybe let me leave my phone on my desk. And maybe I'll see a fox in the woods and I'll think like, I should have brought my phone, you know? But like, but what that's doing for me, you know, not having that is far larger of an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna just hop on board with the leaving the devices behind, because we know how deeply they're affecting and fragmenting our attention and our ability to even read when we have a book. Guys, I'm so embarrassed. The other day I was reading a book, it's just a novel, and in the middle of the page, without even thinking about it, I set it down. It wasn't even the end of a chapter. And I picked up my phone. I had that restlessness. And I thought, what am I doing? You know? So they really, we know this, right? My daughter was in college, and she called me one day, and she said, Mom, she'd read the studies about how even having the phone in your room makes you less attentive and more anxious and unable to access that kind of, you know, witness that we're talking about here, a source of creativity. And she said, but I don't know what to do because I have to get to rehearsal and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Claire, there's this fascinating new technology for that. She said, what is it? And I said, it's a wristwatch. And she asked for one for her birthday and started a little movement at Vassar. But it's really true. So leaving it behind, it makes us restless at first. And that's just a signal that, you know, how much our peace is being interrupted, but we need to reclaim it. I mean, when you say, what do we do? Fearlessly reclaim our attention, beginning with really trying to sever our dependence on those devices.
And it can be in really small ways, I think. You know, I mean, I mean, I'm not currently wearing a wristwatch because the battery died and I haven't kind of replaced it yet. But like, there's a period where, you know, just sort of pulling my phone out to check the time, then I end up 10 minutes in, 15 minutes in into something else that was not my intent.
But something really cool.
But something very cool and very needed. But, you know, just sort of having a timepiece here where, as opposed to engaging with my phone, you know, cut down on that immensely.
Recommend the watch. Try the wristwatch, not the Apple Watch.
So we have about 2 minutes, and I do want to ask about the animal thing. Silas, you really highlighted it. I think there's an interesting, you know, we've come through a modern history where our sense of the religious and the holy has become very separate from the material. And all of you in various ways have really talked about holiness, either through, you know, by referring to Merton or, you know, referring to getting off of the trodden path as actually a lot more connected to the physical and the material. And, so what do you think keeps us from embracing our animal selves? Or what would you recommend if there is something that's keeping us from doing that? To, you know, what's a practice that you could suggest to people to just remember that, like, you're a mammal and you have these sensory capacities, right? How can we do that?
To me, it's just, you know, intentionality. And again, I think there's just a real correlation between heightening your senses and also thinking that everything that is holy. Mm-hmm. And to me, adopting those two mantras into my life was life-changing for me. Mm-hmm. And it did allow me to gain empathy. to walk through the world thinking like that. It makes you pause and think, somebody cuts you off in traffic or whatever, and then you think, oh, they're holy, you don't. Flip them off, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's better for everybody,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that is a practice that I really recommend to just, the more you intentionally think that, then it just becomes organic part of your day.
Love that. Yeah.
Two things come to mind, which is one, for me, trying to hold what I feel is the truth, that very often we see humanity as being something that is coexisting with the natural world as opposed to part of it, and whether that's like the destruction of that natural world, or whether even it's the conserving of it, I have to take care of this thing, as opposed to recognizing I'm taking care of myself when I'm taking care of this, that there's not a delineation between the two. And so that welcomes the animal of me, and I think also, like Silas said, heightening those senses. And one of those senses heightening for me is to I give the space to my brain far too much, give the space to my heart a little less, and give space to my body probably least of all, And so seeking to kind of let my body take up more space at my own table, If you are hungry, Anise, eat. If you are tired, Anise, rest. Just giving permission to sort of hey, it needs to do things as well, just like these two things do.
Yeah, that's great.
I know we're out of time, but I just want to put forth moderation is important too. Don't beat yourself up when you fail, when when you do lay on the horn as somebody.
Thank you. I was feeling pretty bad.
We're not saints or monsters,
No, I always think, if we had to do religious ethics behind the wheel, boy, we'd be discouraged.
One thing I'll just say about this animal knowing is I try to remember in the world that we are so prone to measuring other animals' ways of knowing and intelligence by our own yardstick. If they make vocalizations that we can think of as language, oh, they're smart. Or they can recognize faces, oh, they're smart. But there's an infinity of animal intelligence and ways of knowing that, that are beyond our capacities. Earthworms learn with their skin, and starlings are tuned to sound, and all these things that are just beyond us. And I love thinking about that and wandering through the world. And I know this is a weird one, but try this sometime. If you're in the presence of, a deer or a chickadee or a robin or a crow or a raven, try imitating it. Try taking on the posture and maybe the gaze and how it's seeing the world. It can really, it's fun, and it is modeling eccentricity, which we need to do for one another. And I think we learn something, and then the next time you see that creature, you're like, oh, I know something.
I love that. Let's thank our panelists for their wonderful wisdom.